Welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. Episode 504. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility since 2005. We're celebrating our 15-year anniversary of Tranquility du Jour. And today we're talking with a dear soul who I've had on the podcast before, and I'll be sure to have a link to our previous chat, Camille DeAngelis. And we're discussing her new book, A Bright, Clean Mind, Veganism for Creative Transformation. We discuss, obviously, veganism, benefits artists notice, a few vegan artists, plus tips and resources. Prepare to be inspired to create and possibly even consume differently. Reminder to hit the subscribe button in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode of Tranquility du Jour. Also, we have an app so you can have all the back episodes of Tranquility du Jour on the go for iPhones and Androids. There is a link to that also in the show notes, which can be found at kimberlywilson.com/504. A few things that are coming up. We've got the Fall TDJ Live on Sunday, September 20th from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there's a link to sign up. Again, it's a free event, and you'll learn the 8 seasonal tranquility tips. Also, I have a new e-course that will be coming out this fall, TDJ Lifestyle, where we dive into the 5 TDJ tenets. There's a link in the show notes to join the waitlist. Also, the last event that I have scheduled so far is January 1st. I know, already talking New Year's Day. But this is an event I typically hold in person, and it's so much fun. And yet, with COVID, we will not be doing that. So the good news is anyone can join. You don't have to come to Washington, D.C. So this is January 1st from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, it's a virtual retreat on all things New Year's. And there's a link to join us in the show notes. I'm so excited to share this episode with you. So let's dive in. Camille DeAngelis is the author of 5 novels, including the Alex Award-winning Bones and All, a 3rd edition guide to Ireland, and 2 books of practical philosophy, Life Without Envy, Ego Management for Creative People. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes to our original interview on this book, and A Bright, Clean Mind, Veganism for Creative Transformation. She's also a Master Certified Vegan Lifestyle Coach and Educator through Victoria Moran's Main Street Vegan Academy, where I met Camille, and actually I met her at Squam, which is a beautiful, beautiful art experience that happens in New Hampshire, and unfortunately is not happening right now due to COVID. But then I got to know her even better at this masterclass in New York. Now, she lives in New England, soon to be DC, and you can find her at cometparty.com. Welcome, Camille. It's great to have you back on the show.
It's so nice to be back, Kimberly. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, congrats on your latest book, A Bright, Clean Mind, Veganism for Creative Transformation.
Thank you so much. It's funny. I was listening to our last conversation that we had on your podcast a few years ago, and I had mentioned, I don't think that I mentioned that it was going to be a book specifically about veganism, but I said that I had more creativity books in the works. So it's nice to come back and celebrate with you now that this one is out in the world.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe whenever I saw you in New York City, August of 18, that this is something that you may have mentioned, that you were like, oh, I just want to kind of pull together something on how veganism has actually helped my creative process. And then here it is.
Yes. And so you and I were at Main Street Vegan Academy, the master class in August of 2018. And I actually did a couple of interviews during that same trip to New York, which are now in the book.
I love it. So what gave you the impetus, like the idea to bring this forward? Because it is interesting, right? It's like, okay, veganism, creativity, I get those, but I've never kind of seen them woven together this way. So give us a little background on it.
So I had been a vegetarian for years, and I hadn't connected what I was eating to the frequent, trough periods that I was experiencing in between creative projects where I called them my troughs. So in between book projects, especially, I would go through a bunch of false starts. I felt really dispirited. I felt like a phony. And I didn't think about how what I was eating might be contributing to those feelings of anxiety and frustration and uncertainty until I went to a reforestation project in India, which, of course, it's so cliched, this white woman goes to find herself in India, but that's basically what happened. So as a longtime vegetarian coming to this vegan community, I was exposed to a lot of new ideas and new perspectives. And I had a conversation with a long-term volunteer who had been vegan for 10 years. And he said, what's keeping you from veganism? You've been vegetarian for a long time. And as I responded, every word that was coming out of my mouth, I immediately identified those words as excuses. And I had that like wonderful light over my head. I mean, it was almost like a literal light over my head. It's like I felt it, I saw it. And that was going on 10 years. This was 9 years ago. It was April 2011. And I noticed that my creativity just I can't even tell you the difference between before and after. I got sick, the usual ways that people tend to get sick when they go to India, and it was fine. I was, out of commission for 6 days in the healing hut. This is a very, hippie, crunchy kind of place. And I was having these, I was sleeping all day, but every time I woke up, it was like I had been dreaming all of these new ideas. I just felt so lit up and so inspired, and I felt unstuck. And since then, so it's been over 9 years, I have not experienced a day of creative block. And I believe, and I first wrote about this for a sidebar in Victoria's book, our mentor, Victoria Moran, her book, The Good Karma Diet. She had asked some of our classmates to, contribute our How We Went Vegan stories. And so this was the first time I was writing about this. And I said, I believe that I felt the fear and the anguish of mothers whose babies were being taken away from them, because I was consuming the products of those mothers' bodies that were intended for their children. And so that is that's my not scientific, psycho-spiritual explanation, but it feels intuitively right to me. It makes sense. And my creative process ever since has been so much more joyful and so much easier than it ever was before. And when you have an epiphany like this, and you have, this transformation happen in your own life and in your own creative work, you can't keep that to yourself. You have to share it.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think you've done a really good job of kind of laying it out in this book. And, what I think is interesting too is the way you kind of divided the book up, right? Of course, you have the introduction, but part 1, sticking points. Part 2, really, this is all about kind of your conversations with a variety of amazing vegan artists. And then part 3, tips and resources. So can you talk a little bit about how you decided to kind of break it up? Because I hear you're like, okay, veganism and creativity, but then what?
Yes. So I'll tell you this funny story. So Lantern Books, as you probably know, they're an amazing vegan publisher. They've been around for a while now, based in Brooklyn, I believe. And so I had a conversation with Martin Rowe, the publisher, about doing this book. And I didn't end up going with Lantern, but I would like to publish with them in the future because they put out absolutely wonderful books. And so we were laughing in this conversation about how the first iteration of this manuscript was my angry first draft. And my agent had been quite clear on that. She said, you need to rewrite this. You need to go, let's make it more quote unquote attractivist, which I have an issue with that term. But on the other hand, you can't deny that it is quite effective. And I think Henry Lien, one of the artists I interview, he's a middle grade novelist and a speculative fiction writer in Los Angeles. He doesn't call himself an attractivist, but he is so joyful and so happy. And he's also really, really productive. And his work has been so well received, glowing reviews in the New York Times. And he says that he finds that people will message him, they'll take him aside. They say, like, what's your secret? I want some of your joy. And he says, it's my diet, it's my lifestyle. I believe that animals have souls. They are sentient creatures just as we are. Pigs may not be able to do calculus. This is me paraphrasing. Pigs can't do calculus, but it doesn't matter. They're as smart as your dogs, if not smarter. And once you broaden your circle of compassion, you don't know what's going to happen, what effects you're going to be able to experience in your life. So I went back and thought, okay, how can I put more joy into this book? Because that was part of the impetus, was that I wanted to communicate that. And I simply had not done it in my angry first draft, as Martin put it. So I realized that, okay, so first of all, last time I was on your podcast, Kimberly, we talked about my book, Life Without Envy, Ego Management for Creative People. And this book sort of grew out of that. And because of the way that book was structured with, I call them misapprehensions, I felt that it would be effective to use a similar structure in the first section of the book. After the introduction, I call them sticking points. And I realized that a lot of the chapters that I had in my initial manuscript dovetailed quite nicely with some of these, what I called sticking points, psychological hangups that I was asking other artists for. And these are not yet vegan artists. I put out a call on Facebook and I got loads of responses. And I realized that a lot of what I had already written had already answered a lot of the questions and the problems that people were articulating to me in that Facebook post. And so that was how part one came about, with the sticking points, and then an essay, a chapter answering each sticking point. And to give you an idea, to give your listeners a sense of an example of, one or two of the sticking points. So there's one chapter called FOMO or FOMU, FOMO as in fear of missing out, or FOMU as in the now I think quite well-known plant-based ice cream parlor in Boston called FOMU. So the sticking point for that chapter is, I cringe every time I hear the phrase living your best life, because I always have this twitchy suspicion that I'm not. So that's one. Just sort of flipping through my book here. Here's a big one. Well, they're all big ones. Sticking point number 4, I hypercaffeinate to fend off chronic lethargy. Even when there's time to create, I don't always feel mentally or emotionally up to it. And that's when I talk about the physical effects, or at least the physical effects that I have experienced, and that, in comparing notes with other vegans, that, everyone has more energy and a more consistent energy level throughout the day. And, when you have a greater sense of purpose, that will definitely get you bounding out of bed in the morning, because your creative practice is more than, this is going back to Life Without Envy, but your creative practice is so much more than proving yourself now. It's about making a contribution. And so that was part of the crux of my book, big part of the crux of my book, Life Without Envy. And so that's how this book grew out of that, because this is, I hope, my most significant contribution yet. So that's part one. Part two, I called it Experiments and Explorations and Conversations with Vegan Artists. So the chapters go back and forth between, or the sections go back and forth between my trying something new or learning about something new and interviews with vegan artists. And there are visual artists, there are musicians, there are writers, there's a filmmaker, Melanie Light, who has made the first, I believe, vegan feminist horror film called The Herd, which you can watch on YouTube. And so I go back and forth between these really candid, juicy, I think they're juicy conversations with all of these wonderful artists. And oh, and I should also mention that there are pictures, images throughout the book, which was ultimately why I decided not to go with Lantern, even though I love Lantern, is that they weren't going to be able to do the book in full color. So I wanted to be able to showcase the work of the artists I was profiling. So yeah, so it goes back and forth between my chapters, my experience, and the conversations I'm having with all my new vegan artist friends. And yeah, and then the last part of the book is tips and resources. And I tried to be as candid as I possibly could be, because, we don't live in the world we want to see yet. And, you experience so much, in terms of resistance from, people who don't want you to change. And they see you feeling so much more energized, so much more full of purpose, so much more sensitive to cruelty in every form. And they feel threatened by that, unfortunately. And so, I wanted to, offer some heartening words, some encouragement to anyone who wants to be able to stand and, be serene and be confident, but be firm, gentle but firm in the face of, microaggressions or out and out aggressions from people who still don't understand what's wrong about eating and abusing animals.
Yeah, I love the way this has been laid out. And I think one of the sticking points too that really stuck with me is I feel like I'm riding in the passenger seat of my own career and life. And, it just makes me think of that book. I think it's a book, but it's based on a woman, an Australian nurse who worked with, people at end of life, and how, the number one regret of the dying is living someone else's life. And, I feel like that's, somewhat aligned with this idea of like, I'm in the passenger seat, someone else is driving my existence. And so can you speak to that? Because I have to wonder if other listeners, or listeners in general may resonate with that.
Yeah, for sure. So I've always thought about what it means to be living on your own terms. Like I remember grappling with this as a teenager. And unfortunately, I had a great English teacher in 9th grade, but I don't remember. So she taught us, we read Anthem by Ayn Rand. Unfortunately, at least if she told me, it made no impression on me. And I'm pretty sure she didn't get into, all of the real politics of, Ayn Rand's philosophy and her life and how deeply, deeply problematic it is. It was, just talking about how great individualism is and, this false binary of, you can, go your own way and, don't let yourself be, sucked into this, the conformity of, it was all so unformed at that point. And it took me several years to figure out that there is, as I was about to say, this false binary of either you can do everything yourself and, try to reinvent the wheel in terms of how you want to live your life. Or you can conform to what the rest of society is doing. And that false binary leaves no space for how to create a life that feels true to you within a community. because individualism is, it's so selfish if it's not moderated by a sense of everything I do affects everyone around me. And that includes the people, the non-human people I am consuming and I'm choosing to consume. And so I think there are people who give themselves credit for, and this is so true in the artistic community, people give themselves credit and are recognized as being mavericks. And yet when you actually look at the way they live their lives and the work they're producing, it's not revolutionary. It's not radical in the sense that we would ideally be using those terms. And what I say in the book is that, it is our role as artists to question the dominant culture, to make an inquiry, to evaluate the facts, look for inconvenient truths, expose those inconvenient truths, and to create a reasoned critique of that dominant culture. And, the truth is that the most fundamental expression of culture is food. And yet that is a truth that I don't see many artists willing to examine. And so that section, so they're actually, I'm completely forgetting now. In my Angry First Draft, I did write a whole chapter on individualism. And now I'm remembering there was this, there's a vegan, an animal rights scholar at NYU who called out Edward Snowden, who was talking about revolutionary love on his Twitter account. And I think it was, on Christmas or something. And he showed a picture of himself and his girlfriend eating from a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken. And this is, I believe his name is Jay Schuster. I think he's an academic at NYU. And he said, to consider the lives of the animals or what's left of those animals in that bucket, that would be revolutionary love, and he's a figure who gets, so much credit in our culture for, being the whistleblower, the man who stood up for what eventually stood up for what was right and exposed, a lot of dishonesty. And yet he's not willing to take that, take it to its logical ends. And so that did not make it into the book, but I would like to publish that at some point. But the sticking point chapter that you were talking about was about agency, and it was inspired by a woman, an author I spent time with at a residency, who had asserted that she, and at this time she was still in her 20s, she asserted that she was going to die of heart disease, just like all of her family before her, and there was nothing she could do about it. I pointed out that, her diet was very heavy on animal products. And I said, it's not your genetics. It's the fact that you and your family have all eaten the same foods for generations. And she could not, for whatever reason, she was just, I don't know, she was not psychologically equipped. She could not hear me. And this is, I'm facing this a lot when I try to talk about the book. People are just, they're not ready. And I don't know that I can say anything that will make them ready. But, I've put the book out. It's available. The information is available. I've spent years researching it. And, hopefully the people who are almost ready will receive it, and they'll be able to, to make some changes in their lifestyle and in their worldview as a result.
So one of the things that I thought was really impressive about the book is the level of diversity, right, of the various people that you spoke to and and then various artists, etc., all sorts of creativity. And I really liked this one chapter or piece that was an exploration of vegan hip hop. And I just want to read a little bit about it because I loved kind of how you presented this. Like a lot of white people I know, since the 2016 presidential election, I've been looking for ways to become a truer ally to marginalized communities. It finally clicked for me that one practical way to stick it to white supremacists is to support the work of artists and entrepreneurs of color on a much more deliberate basis, to obtain goods and services from POC-owned businesses, and to buy, share, and promote the music, literature, and images of artists of color. This could mean going a mile or two out of your way to buy bread or cupcakes from a Black-owned bakery, or requesting that your local library order a book by a marginalized author to add it to its collection. It certainly means seeking out emerging and undeservedly obscure artists and purchasing books and music in addition to reading and listening to it for free online. And, I love this because I think it's so of the now, right? And yet this book came out last year, and you've been really kind of focused and thinking on this since 2016. So can you speak to this? Because it's clearly very intentional that you made sure that this was a book that focused on a wide range of people.
Yes. So this is, getting back to inconvenient truths. And this is the thing that really gets me is that, white animal rights activists have trained themselves to look for inconvenient truths. That was how they became vegan. And yet there are these glaring inconvenient truths within the movement. We've seen with animal rights, Me Too, AR Me Too, that hashtag, that there have been many women in the animal rights movement who have come forward to say, I was abused, I was harassed by, prominent white men in leadership positions within the movement, and it's no different than any other industry or any other movement. And, this, in the same way, there is an element within the animal rights movement that is shockingly racist. There is so much, and I have to put an asterisk here because, and I did a video about this on my YouTube channel, self-described vegans versus actual veganism, because, if you're not anti-racist, then you cannot call yourself a vegan, because humans are animals, we are all animals. And if you are not advocating on a daily basis, doing everything you can to try to elevate the perspectives of people of color, and there are so many amazing vegans of color within the movement who are not receiving the same visibility. They're not receiving the same, for instance, a speaking engagement. I live in Providence, Brown. Who do they ask to come and speak on animal rights? Prominent white YouTuber, male YouTuber. And he's making a lot of money, going to schools and giving these speeches. You're not seeing these amazing Black vegan intellectuals, and there are many of them. They're not receiving the same opportunities. They're not receiving the same, levels in terms of, the honorariums that they receive to come and speak, the speaking fees. And that is something that white vegans need to be mindful of, and they need to train themselves to notice. And so I felt really passionately about that as I was writing this book. It wasn't like I had to say, okay, I have a quota. I have to have a certain number of, vegan artists from marginalized communities. It was just a matter of searching hashtags on Instagram, looking at who was doing, putting out like really cool books and art and music, because they're all there. They're putting their work out. It's just that they're not receiving the same level of recognition. I mean, when you think about like who's the most famous vegan artist, probably most people would say Moby. Moby has, some deeply, I've seen some deeply problematic stuff, on his Instagram account in terms of, letting women say no without making an issue out of it, which is very troubling. And so there's such a broad swath of creative vegans from, in every discipline, and, brilliant Black intellectual vegans who, like Christopher Sebastian is amazing. Like, every vegan should know who Christopher Sebastian is and should be following Christopher Sebastian on Twitter and Facebook, and, so much amazing content, so much eye-opening, brain wide open, like, oh wow, I never thought about it, like so many revelatory moments just in a 4-minute video like I was watching of theirs yesterday. So there's this whole world of creative offerings and insight that vegans from marginalized communities have to offer and are offering, that, I see so many white vegans they're not noticing it. They're sort of filtering it out. And so when they're sharing content, it always seems to be from the same, white vegan influencers who, as Melanie Light points out in her interview, I mean, she is very forceful about, calling out these, white men in the movement who are making a lot of money, and they show up and, to these events, and sometimes they don't even participate in the events. I mean, she knew of one person in particular who showed up basically to see, who he could sleep with. And, this is very uncomfortable to be talking about. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to think about it. But these inequities must be addressed. If we're really going to talk about oppression, I mean, there's so many interlocking oppressions, and it's all the same underlying system. And so we need to, you can't just, I'm just thinking that the Hydra popped into my head. You can't just hack at one of the heads. Like, it's all the same monster. So
yeah. And, I think that you have done a really great job of trying to introduce people. And listeners, I'll put a link to Christopher Sebastian because I actually don't know him. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. You are in for such a treat. Oh my gosh. They're wonderful.
I'd love to chat about Cynthia King. So as a ballet dancer, I came across her shoes, which are vegan ballet shoes. And she has a dance studio in Brooklyn, New York. And, what I love is that she created vegan ballet slippers. Now, I found out about her after I had already bought my slippers, but I was sure to not get the leather ones. I got the canvas ones, but they do have a little bit of suede on the sole. And so whenever I found out that she existed, I was so excited and have followed her ever since. And so can you just speak to, a little bit about your interaction kind of with Cynthia and what she's doing for the dance world?
Oh my gosh. Cynthia is... she is, I can't even find the right adjectives to describe how wonderful she is. And because what I admire about her so much is she is so unapologetic, and she is, she's so loving and so enthusiastic, but she's very much, this is my business. These are the facts. And therefore, my ethical beliefs are a result of my acknowledging these facts about animal cruelty. And if you want to bring your child, or if you want to dance at my studio, you will need to abide by these guidelines. And I just love how, like, this is the way it is, how matter of fact she is about it. But it's not in a way that's alienating to anyone, which I really appreciate. I mean, we talked, she talked candidly about that. She said, that some parents will give her a little bit of pushback, but they know that she's one of the best dance teachers. Her studio is one of the best dance studios that they could possibly take their kids to, in the New York City area. So it is an honor for her to be a student of hers. And so she's using her expertise and her business savvy in the service of the animals consistently. And for years and years, she's been doing this. And I just admire her so much for showing up every day and doing it lovingly but firmly. I really cannot say enough good things about her. She's amazing. And there's a great energy in her studio. And we just had a lovely chat. We just, sat in her studio, and she, she fed me a fresh pineapple, and, we had like a fruit salad, and just chatted for a couple hours. It was really lovely.
So my kind of last piece I want to touch on is the tips and resources part, right? Your third, part 3. And anything that you'd like to share with our listeners from this, because you have so many great tips and resources in here from, meal prep for the win, tweak your vices, find your crowd, remember everything is figure outable, be prepared, eat as much as you need to feel full. And listeners, that's all about the green smoothies for me. So you just have a lot of really good stuff in here. So is there anything in particular that you'd like to kind of to wrap up, to share with our listeners about kind of tips and resources and the creative journey in general?
Yeah. So I guess the first two things that popped out to me, because I'm thinking about, your listeners, maybe some of them are veg curious, and, a couple of immediate like, oh, but how do I, things that pop up. I think what people need to, I think people need to keep in mind that, whenever you're developing a good habit, you need to spend a little bit of time learning what you can and setting yourself up for success, because I think a lot of people don't take the time to do that. And so they'll eat a salad, and they don't realize how much protein there is in chickpeas, or the different nuts and seeds that you could put in a salad, or even in the salad dressing itself if it's made from tahini, things like this. They eat a salad, they don't feel full, and then they end up thinking like, I don't understand how anyone can eat like this and feel full and feel nourished. And it's just a matter of educating yourself, following some food blogs, picking up some cookbooks, and taking the time to learn and to acquire maybe some new culinary skills and trying some new things in the kitchen. And then, realizing that your taste buds take time to adjust. So something that like a green smoothie, for instance, someone who never drinks, kale smoothies is gonna, you could make that, make yourself a big tall glass of delicious kale smoothie, but you give it to a friend who's visiting, who's never had a kale smoothie before, and it's just like, ugh. Whereas we think it's delicious, but it's because our taste buds have we've given them plenty of time to adjust, and it only takes 2 or 3 weeks. But to make sure that you're giving yourself that space to adjust and to give your taste buds time to adjust to create a new definition of delicious, and that always that changes over time, in the course of anyone's life. And so the other thing that I would suggest is to look for your people, because I think that's the other challenge that veg curious or new vegans have, is that they may be living in a place where they don't know any other vegans or any vegetarians, and they feel isolated, and they can be experiencing some microaggressions from family members who feel threatened, that they're trying this new way of life, this new way of being, because some people unfortunately do feel like it's taking something away from your relationship with them, that you're trying to grow and expand and try to broaden that circle of compassion, because people feel tacitly, they feel implicated in that change, that decision that you've made, because they're still eating I try not to use the word meat anymore, because I do, but I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, people who are still eating non-human people, they feel threatened when you try to make those changes. And so it's so important to connect with other people who are also learning, and people who are further along in their journey. And so I'll just, take this opportunity to say, like, any question you have, anything you want to ask me about, my inbox is always open. My DMs are open. So, to find those, vegans who are and look, heck, like we all are, right? Like we're all like, oh, let me tell you about all of these wonderful cookbooks and all these wonderful bloggers and Instagram accounts to follow, and check out these adorable videos from this farm animal sanctuary. And to make those, to prioritize, like making those connections, like number one, learning about new foods and new combinations and new ways of cooking, and then number two, to also prioritize making those new connections with other humans who are, starting to make this journey, and, to have, meetups in person if possible. If there's a vegan or vegetarian restaurant in your area, to join vegan meetup groups. Because there are more of us all the time, and it is getting easier and easier and easier. And so I guess those are the two things that I would extract from that section and say, like, these are the two highlights.
Great. Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And I think that, it's like recognizing that there are so many great kind of recipes and things like that out there that you can easily grab online. You don't have to buy anything. And then, number two, surrounding yourself with like-hearted people, I think is so important. And my last question for you, Camille, is the name of the podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So how are you finding, can you give us one example of how you're finding tranquility in your days right now?
Well, here's a plug for your Facebook group, right? Because I had told you in your Facebook group recently that I am obsessed with my frankincense lime essential oil blend from Eden's Garden. So I've been putting that on my wrists and, my inner elbows and behind my ears, on a daily basis. And then I just sniff myself. And it's that really is helping me to stay calm, and because we're recording this at the time we're recording this, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and it's a very anxiety making time, and so any little thing that I can do is going to help. But I already gave you that idea, so that's kind of cheating. So I have to give you another one. So something that I've started doing recently, and this is so simple, and I'm glad that I'm doing it, but I wish I had started it sooner. The last time we spoke, I talked about doing Julia Cameron's idea of morning pages from her book, The Artist's Way. And I go back and forth between doing lots of journaling and not much journaling. But so lately I have really pared it down to the essence. And, in terms of emotional hygiene, doing something really simple at the beginning of each morning that sort of recalibrates me and gets me ready for the day. And it's just sort of like a sitting with myself and letting myself feel my feelings, which sounds so simple, but I have not always done that, unfortunately. And so now I'm doing this thing where at the beginning of the day, I open my journal and I simply write down how I feel and why I'm feeling it. And so that could be like 3 lines if it's very uncomplicated what I'm feeling, or it could be pages and pages. But it's such a simple practice. And I have really felt the difference in my emotional life and my emotional well-being over the last few weeks since I've been doing that. So that's definitely been helping my tranquility.
I love that. How am I feeling and why? So good. Well,
Yes.
Camille, thank you so much for being back on the show, and congrats again on your amazing new book, A Bright Clean Mind, Veganism for Creative Transformation.
Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. It's always a pleasure.
So in the show notes, you'll find ways to connect with Camille. You'll find her Instagram account, her Facebook, her YouTube, a link to grab a copy of A Bright Clean Mind. It is the most beautiful cover I think I've ever seen. And also links to Christopher Sebastian, who we discuss, Cynthia King Dance, who we discuss, and Black Vegan Authors and Activists, an article that she wrote. And the great thing about Cynthia King, as I was pulling all this together, I was like, I need new ballet slippers. And so I purchased a pair of her beautiful light pink ballet slippers, and I can't wait to receive them, because even though I get canvas slippers and they're so lovely because they're not leather, on the bottom there's a suede kind of sole and kind of padding. under the ball of the foot. Well, with Cynthia's, it says cruelty-free and it's faux suede. And so I'm just like so excited to receive them. So listeners, I'll be sure to post a photo of these over on my blog, Instagram, etc. Now let's stay connected. If you'll join the TDJ Insiders Facebook group, you will find resources, inspiration, make connections, and be part of the online book club. Also, if you're new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link to learn more in the show notes, again at KimberlyWilson.com/504. Be sure to sign up for weekly Inbox Love, my love notes, where you get invites, inspiration, and more. A link to my 6 books and planner, ways to follow along Tranquility du Jour on social media, and a link to my seasonless, vegan, locally made, eco-friendly fashion line. Finally, if you have a moment to share a review of this podcast or any of my books, I'd be so grateful. You can find more information on this at KimberlyWilson.com/review. Now, I wish you a phenomenal, creative, and juicy week ahead. Thank you, as always, for tuning in.